what should I be drinking my wine out of then?
What kind of wine do you like? Red or white?
Oh, I'm a rosé drinker, a strictly rosé, year round.
Yeah? You want to be drinking that chilled, obviously, as you would, in a nice kind of open, more like a goblet-y sort of wide rimmed glass or whatever. And if you want to go into kind of colour or what have you, then you would accompany that with a nice kind of, if it's a sweet rosé, then it would be a pink to kind of burgundy coloured glass, I would suggest that you try and find.
Don't worry, this episode will not just be about me drinking rosé wine. It's all about multisensory design and marketing techniques. Scott is a director at Fathom, a consultancy that's one of the leaders in making marketing that appeals to our senses. Appealing to the senses has become key for brands aiming to stand out. But what is that? So think about the smell in the department store, the sound you hear when a car door closes, how a product feels to touch, and all those kind of things. This has a big impact on which products we end up buying. Today, we'll discuss the potential and power of multisensory design, explaining what it means and why it's the future of marketing. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, the world's leading trend forecasting company, and you're listening to Lives of Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast about how we'll live our lives in the future. Scott, please could you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Scott King and I'm director of Fathom, which is a multisensory specialist.
So I was introduced to you via a member of the WGSN team who saw you present at an event, and he came back and was raving about this information that you imparted, that if you drink a hot drink, and I don't know whether it was tea or coffee, so you're going to have to tell me which it was, if you drink it out of different coloured cups, it tastes different. So this particular person's mind was absolutely blown by this concept, and they had gone home and tried it and said, you were absolutely right. So can you give me the professional version of that story?
Yeah. So I guess what makes us different as a creative kind of agency is everything we do is underpinned by scientific research. And that research kind of is about understanding how me, you, everyone kind of listening are multisensory beings. You know, we use all of our senses all the time. And yet when it comes to kind of branding and marketing, we tend to think visually first, right? That's not to say that we shouldn't do that, but it's to say that we should think about the influence that all of the other senses are having on us, okay? And this science is fascinating. So a lot of people refer to sort of synesthesia or synesthetic marketing, which is a bit of a misnomer because people that have synesthesia have a kind of a hard cross-wiring of their senses. So neurologically, there's a kind of overlapping of their senses, and people, that can be through any of the senses. So one of the common forms of synesthesia is sound to taste. So you can say a word or hear a sound and you'll have a real, as if you're actually tasting something, experience of it. The problem with it is, if you're trying to apply it to branding and marketing, is that if we got a room full of like 100 people that all had sound to taste synesthesia, and we said a word, we'll say your name, like Carla, what do you taste? And everyone would say something completely different. Okay. So we can't really use it to inform sort of branding and marketing work because everyone's going to have a different reaction to that. But the science which we work with, this cross-sensory or cross-modal science, is uncovering linkages which we all have that are universal and largely cross-cultural as well. And there's some great examples of that. And I think the one you're referring to is you give people something to drink. It can be anything, but basically coffee, hot chocolate, it could be wine, whatever you want, in 4 different colored mugs. You got a red mug, blue mug, yellow mug, and a black mug. And you say to them, and it's exactly the same drink in all of them. You say to them, okay, take a sip out of each and what do you taste? And people, sort of like 95% of people will say, okay, that tastes sweet when they're drinking the one from the red mug. It tastes kind of weak and watery from the yellow mug, and almost bitter from the black mug. And so then you say to them, okay, which one did you like the most? And they'll point at the one in the red mug and they'll say, I love that one. And you go, okay, great. Why? And then their rational mind kicks in for that to justify that almost like sort of instinctive reaction to what they're experiencing. They'll say things, it could be anything. It could be, well, if it's a coffee, it's got better bean content within it. It's thicker, it's more velvety. What they're never, ever going to do is point at the one in the red mug and go, well, of course I like that one the most because you've served it to me in a red mug. And yet we know that that's the only thing that's fundamentally changing your perception of what you're tasting. And this extends to all sorts of sort of inputs into that, sort of, if we take that experience. So it could be the sound in the environment that you're drinking that out of as well. So if you're listening to music, if say we're enjoying white wine, for example, you want to have something upbeat and kind of fast paced in the background, a bit like Blondie or something like that. And you will rate it as being 45% more fresh and zingy than if you didn't have the music in the background. So this is why we really need to think about it. If even worse, you had something that was kind of incongruent or not pairing with your white wine, it would actually make it taste worse. So
God, that's amazing.
It's crazy, isn't it? And so the point being that a certain level of restaurant and above will be thinking about the paper quality on which they're printing their kind of menus. They'll be thinking about the quality of the linen on the tablecloths and the cutlery that you have. But when it comes to the music that's being played, they may have given it some sort of level of attention, sort of thinking, well, we're premium, let's have it kind of classical or jazz or whatever. But actually, you really need to be quite specific, because you could be the best chef in the world, but if you've got an incorrect or unmatching soundtrack in the background, it's going to be making your food taste awful.
In that case, I've got a far more important question. What should I be drinking my wine out of then?
What kind of wine do you like, red or white?
Oh, I'm a rosé drinker, a strictly rosé, year round.
Yeah? You want to be drinking that chilled, obviously, as you would, in a nice kind of open, more like a goblet-y sort of wide rimmed glass or whatever. And if you want to go into kind of colour or what have you, then you would accompany that with a nice kind of, if it's a sweet rosé, then it would be a pink to kind of burgundy coloured glass, I would suggest that you try and find.
And if it's a dry rosé, I'm getting very specific now. You could be like just changing my life, given how much wine I drink.
With a dry rosé, you don't want it to be as rich in terms of intensity of the redness within the colour of the glass. So you just go for something that's a little bit more, less dark red or what have you. So you're sort of, it's more of a pastel-y sort of red green or what have you that you're going to be drinking it out of.
Oh my God, this is like blowing my mind. Does any of this have anything to do with like when we go on holiday, things taste better? So like the classic is you go and you have your limoncello and you're like, oh, it's delicious. Buy a bottle and go back home and you're like, whoa, this is rancid. Is that because does temperature have anything to do with it?
Yeah. Anything that's affecting all of our senses and the way that we're feeling at any point in time. So the way in which we feel at any point in time dictates our behavior, what we think about something, how we evaluate a product or a brand experience. And what shapes those feelings and emotions and moods is all of the sensorial information that you're exposed to at that point. So it can be anything, sort of sound, shape, color, texture, material, temperature, quite rightly. Any of these things is going to be having some sort of an effect. And your example is a great one of how many times have we heard, you're on holiday and that book that you were reading was fantastic or everything was amazing, and then you kind of read it again or you try that wine again and it tastes absolutely disgusting. But the good news is that if you were to start to bring back some of those sensorial aspects of the experience you had on holiday to when you're then drinking it at home in a raining day, kind of in the middle of January, it would slowly start to make that experience better again.
So basically, I need to like whack up the heating as high as I possibly can and
sit in front of a sun lamp, okay, topping up the tan. Yeah, exactly. And maybe applying sun cream to yourself while you're sat there as well, because that smell would bring back that feeling of being on holiday. That's a great thing. I don't think we did it at the talk that your colleague came to, but often we'll just spray a smell like of a coconutty kind of sun lotion smell and say, is that a positive or a negative smell? And everyone goes, well, that's positive, isn't it? And you go, well, why?
Yeah,
why is that positive?
Yeah.
Because it reminds me of being on holiday and all those good times. Maybe not if you've got really young kids and you're on holiday, because maybe that would take you to being quite stressed out.
I I'm so fascinated. I'm so fascinated by this. But your example there, if you're a chef and you want the perfect dining experience, that the music, the soundtrack in that room might be as important as the ingredients that are going into the dish. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I guess the point really is that when we think of, a piece of music or something, we think, well, we're listening to it. Therefore, the only thing that's important is what we're hearing. Okay. If we're eating something, then we tend to think, well, all that's important is the quality of the ingredients and where it's been prepared and where it's been sort of, and the actual taste of it and the mouthfeel and the texture. But it's all of these things. Everything is multisensory all the time, and you can't leave anything to chance if you want to deliver something which is going to be, top notch kind of experience. Yeah.
Lena Stores in London?
Yeah.
So originally it was just a lovely little Italian deli and there was a little restaurant, and now it's kind of a chain, but all of them are this beautiful sage green. And now I think maybe the reason I like eating there is because of the sage green walls rather than actually the pasta quality.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky, right? Because the sage green is going to be connecting you back to the overall experience that you've had every time you've been there. But then to the actual dishes, it's going to be pairing better with some dishes rather than others. So I think when you get to your dessert, if you're having a really sweet dessert, you really like your sweet dessert, the sage green is not going to be potentially the best color to accompany that. And I think that, there is this massive growth at the moment and interest in having these dining experiences, a bit like Alchemist in Copenhagen, who we know, and various other restaurants sort of setting up, that enable you to sort of choreograph the sensorial environment over time as you're presented with different dishes, which is a great way of then making sure everything, as far as you can, is sort of bespoke and considered intentionally, such that it's all working as hard as possible. Yes, to make it a great time and a kind of a wow experience, but also to make sure that the taste experience is as best as it can be.
Are you preaching to the converted, or when you speak to brands, are they very cynical about all of this?
I would say it's a polarizing area. You've got people and brands that are immediately kind of dismissive or think, well, we're all over this. It's of course what we do. Lots of luxury brands, I find, think, well, this is just what we do. Of course we have to consider all of these things. And you're thinking, okay, but are you considering it in the right kind of way? Other examples is brands that think, yeah, we're taking a multisensory approach because we do loads of customer activations and events where we'll playlist the music and we'll have maybe a sort of smell machine in the space or whatever. And you're kind of, that is a multisensory experience, yes, because you're stimulating different senses, but it's not coming from a place that's considering holistically what you're doing through one sense and how it affects kind of what you're experiencing through the other senses. On the flip side of that, you then find brands that are wholeheartedly, once you show them the kind of evidence around this and the hard sort of scientific data, wholeheartedly throw themselves into this sort of space and want to apply it both in branding and marketing, but also in product innovation and development, right? So that, using this sort of approach in the science for actually creation of the product in the first place. So it's sort of really built into that, and then sort of expressing that, the essence of the product, multisensorily across your different kind of touch points as well, so that, everything's linked together in a seamless way. And there's a reason for doing that, because the more consistently you prime people and communicate about it, the better the sort of experience is in the end.
I do think the product design side of this is fascinating, because I know we're talking about food and drink quite a lot, but you can see that with sort of every industry. So if you think about beauty, people do think about the packaging quite a lot, and you would say, well, they think about the fragrance because lots of them are selling fragrance. But actually, if you're going to tie all of that together, so we've talked about sun lotion and things like that, but if your moisturizer also gave you all of those things together, and it maybe not in this instance it's a red pot because that's about taste, but that there is something there about how the packaging and the scent and the texture all comes together. So yes, hopefully it's going to make you look better, but actually the feeling and your response to that can be elevated so much. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I'd agree. I often use the example when you're speaking with brands, okay, do you have a brand world and do you have a set of visual identity guidelines? And then pretty much every brand will say, well, of course we do. And you go, okay, great. So do you have anything that considers all of the other senses as well? And they go, well, kind of, no, not really. Or we may have some sort of loose kind of guidance, but nothing's set in stone. And you're saying, well, the point being that would you say, if you're a Vodafone, for example, and you're briefing in an agency and they say, okay, well, what colors should we use? And you go, well, red. And they go, well, what red? And you go, well, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's red, it just doesn't matter, does it? You wouldn't do that. And yet we seem to be okay with doing that in all of these other aspects of sound and music, or aroma, or texture and materiality, and even taste as well. Taste is so often overlooked as a powerful sort of, certainly in business to business marketing and branding, where one of the key elements or strands of outreach is kind of hospitality. We should be thinking more about, okay, if we're serving food and drink, what is it that we're serving, and what is it saying about us?
How does it reflect us as a brand? Okay, we're going to come back and talk about the future and how this is going to evolve. But first of all, some quick fire questions so we get to know you a little bit better. When are you happy?
When I'm happy, when I'm running or when I'm out in nature, that's when I'm happy.
What do you rarely share about yourself?
My massive insecurity and actual terror at standing up in front of a room full of people and delivering sort of public speaking opportunities. I'm always surprised people at the end will come out and go, oh, you must do this a lot and what have you. Little do they know the absolute turmoil and terror that I'm feeling underneath. Yeah.
Well, as I said, the reason I got introduced to you was by someone who heard you speak, and they said you were phenomenal, so you clearly need to stop worrying about that.
Yeah. Easier said than done, right? Isn't it?
However big or small, what one day-to-day life hack couldn't you live without?
I would say I've stopped turning my phone on until I've done everything else and I'm sat at my desk, and that has totally changed the kind of way I feel about the day and going into it.
Last TV show that you binged and had to recommend?
Dope Sick.
Jo, who's my EA, she's badgering me to watch it. She said I've got to watch it. She raved about it.
Oh, it is amazing.
Okay. When and how do you prioritize yourself?
Always make time for going for a run every morning, and I always go for a walk in the evening as well. And that's my kind of time. Family know that if I'm going out, I'm just like, that's like, okay, he's going. This is non-negotiable.
Okay, now this quick fire question is the first time we've asked this one, and it is pertinent
to you
that I think we might keep it because I quite like it. You're the guinea pig, but it is because of you. If you had to lose one sense, what would it be and why?
This is a great question. So if I hadn't been doing what I do for the last almost 20 years, I would jump straight in and go my eyesight, okay? But then being exposed to what I do day to day and the research that's being conducted in this area, the most debilitating loss, so this isn't being born without a particular sense, is smell. Because smell is almost the most emotive sense that we have. And it's so closely linked to taste. So 80% of our sense of taste is smell. That you basically, if you lose your sense of smell, you lose your sense of taste as well. And the loss of smell really inhibits the formation of new memories as well, because so much of our world of memories is relating, a bit like the example with the suntan lotion, okay, is related to. So my answer would have been, it would be sight. But actually, in reality, knowing what I know now, it's sense of smell, 100%.
Wow, okay. Okay, let's look to the future. We're trend forecasters. So how do you think that multisensory design is going to evolve? And I guess how important is it to the future of marketing? And now I think product design as well, because I'm as interested in how it pertains to that. So there's about 4 questions in one there.
Yes, I think it's going to grow in importance. I think that potentially because we're in the middle of such a shift to the digital realm at the moment, when you talk about multisensory, the initial sort of knee-jerk reaction is, well, we're focusing on digital, right? That's so much the kind of importance at the moment. The wonderful thing about the science is that the linkages between the senses are two-way. So we just completed one of a number of studies looking at communicating fragrance or smell in a digital environment where, until we've invented smell-o-vision at scale, or haptic kind of suits and gloves that everyone's got, you're basically left with audio and visual to be able to play with. The visual, we're very sort of good, as we discussed earlier, at giving that the attention that it deserves. However, the sound, we don't give enough attention to. So this research has shown that with a bit more consideration and intention in what you're designing and delivering through sound and visual, you can up to sort of between 75 and 80% deliver an experience that people can accurately identify what the smell is that you're kind of communicating as well. So this is huge for kind of, you mentioned sort of beauty and fragrance brands. Yeah. You don't need to smell something in order to be able to give people the almost real perception and experience of actually smelling something. So it's true kind of digital fragrance. And I think as multisensory branding and marketing and product design evolves, and we start to sort of identify that there are these opportunities that don't need to be overtly multisensory, we're just applying multisensory science in this case to something which is creating a video, We did a study with Oxford University, which I was involved with and leading, where it's called, because every study needs a kind of good pun for a title. It's called Bittersweet Symphony. Okay. And it was, can you communicate or play with what you're tasting through what you're hearing? And this was giving people pieces of something which is both bitter and sweet in the lab, and they tasted it. And based on sort of prior science, we created two soundscapes, one for enhancement of bitterness, one for enhancement of sweetness. You give them the piece, they eat it, you play one soundscape, and they rate how bitter, how sweet, where in the mouth they taste it. And then you stop, play a different soundscape, give them another piece of something completely the same, although they don't know that. And what we showed is that you can make something that's got both bitter and sweet in it taste either entirely bitter or entirely sweet, based upon what you're listening to at that point in time. Okay. So then we thought, okay, that's interesting, because bitter and sweetness, could we do this with smell? So we had people doing exactly the same thing, but with just listening to the soundscapes, but just by smelling a perfume. And it's exactly the same perfume. With one soundscape, they would say that it was a dry perfume. Give them exactly the same thing, play a different soundscape, it's a sweet perfume. So, I mean, this when we sort of were talking about it to master perfumers, we're going, what? Like, you tell me I've dedicated the best part of my life to this kind of like practice of creating, and having the perfect nose to identify these fragrance notes in what I'm creating. And whenever anyone smells it, it tastes completely different to what I've designed. And it's like, yeah.
This is all blowing my mind. I think I'm not going to think about anything that I drink or pick up or buy in quite the same way moving forward. We have a color system called Coloro, which is amazingly advanced. And when we talk to people, we talk about the people's product buying decisions are based, the percentages on color are just through the roof, and why color is so important. But now thinking about the scent and the texture and the music that goes alongside it, that is absolutely phenomenal. I'm so excited about the potential. Can I ask, is there a way of making things, so we've talked about changing people's perception of taste through music. Is there a way of doing that with quality? So are there sounds that make people believe that something is more luxurious or more expensive?
Yeah, there are sound, there are weights, there are colors that will enhance perception of the quality or the premiumness of something. There are even certain notes in sort of scent design that, if you include them, they exude a sense of luxurious quality to them as well. I guess the key thing to say is, if these attributes don't exist within the product or the experience in any way to begin with, this approach doesn't magic it out of nowhere.
People won't believe when they buy such thing that it should have been as expensive if it actually doesn't deliver.
Yeah, it's the old adage, if you can't polish a turd, is very, very, very apt in this kind of way. It needs to have something in there to begin with, to work with.
There's got to be some substance to what we're talking about.
There has to be some substance, yeah.
Okay, final question. I ask this to everyone. Are you more anxious or hopeful about the future. And we've talked about so many different kind of topics today. So maybe the framing for that question with you, Scott, is given what you know and the power of multisensorial, I don't even want to say marketing, but just the power of hitting all the senses and how we can, and again, not in a dark way, but manipulate those senses. Does that make you more anxious or hopeful about the future?
It makes me very hopeful about the future. I think we're just scratching the surface on what will afford us all a deeper understanding of who we are, what we are, and enable us to all lead better lives, really, that are more in tune with our needs and our wants, and allow us to express ourselves more effectively. That doesn't say that it comes with a tinge of kind of anxiety over, for one reason or another, this undeniable science not being embraced. But I think that as certainly technology is evolving at such a fast pace, there will be the tools at our disposal and the systems at our disposal to really sort of build this out and make it more accessible to anyone. We were talking a lot about digital sort of application of this. Overall, I feel really hopeful about it. I genuinely do.
Scott, thank you so much. That was amazing. Really, really fascinating conversation. Loved it.
Really enjoyed it, Carla. Great talking to you.
A big thank you to Scott King, director at Fathom, for joining me to talk about the future of multisensory design and marketing. Next week, WGSN's Create Tomorrow podcast is back with another episode where our experts will be discussing the future of design. If you have any inputs for me to consider, or maybe you know a great guest for this podcast, please drop me a line to lives@wgsn.com. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN. I'll see you next time.